The tape recorder sat on the nightstand like a confession waiting to be heard. Marilyn's hand trembled as she reached for it, not from the pills, though they were there too, amber bottles lined up with military precision, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Outside her Brentwood bedroom window, Los Angeles spread itself beneath an August sky, indifferent and eternal. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of Chanel No. 5 and something else. Fear, maybe, or resignation. She pressed the record button. The mechanical whir filled the silence, and for a moment she simply sat there, listening to the sound of the machine waiting for her voice. How strange, she thought, that after 36 years of speaking words written by other people, wearing emotions designed by studio executives, performing a version of herself that barely resembled the woman beneath, how strange that her own words, in her own voice, might be the most dangerous thing she had ever created. My name? She began, then stopped, cleared her throat, started again. My name is Norma Jean Mortensen. I was born on June 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles County Hospital to a woman who couldn't keep me. And I became Marilyn Monroe because that's what they needed me to be. Her reflection stared back from the vanity mirror across the room. Blonde hair carefully set despite the late hour. Makeup applied with the precision of someone who'd learned that beauty was both armor and prison. But her eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who'd run out of places to hide. If you're listening to this, it means I'm gone. And it means someone found this tape before they could destroy it. She paused, listening to the house settle around her. It was nearly midnight on August 4th, 1962, and the mansion felt enormous and empty. Her housekeeper had gone home hours ago. The phone calls had finally stopped. Studio executives wanting to discuss her next project. Reporters hunting for quotes. Men who claimed to love her, but really only loved the idea of her. Marilyn stood and walked to the window, the tape still recording, capturing the rustle of her white robe, her bare feet against the carpet, the small sigh that escaped when she looked out at the city that had made and broken her in equal measure. I need to tell you about the things they don't want you to know, about how this industry works, about what happens to women who see too much, know too much, threaten to speak too much. She'd been planning this for 3 weeks, since the night she'd overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, a phone call in a producer's office while she waited in the hallway, her presence forgotten or ignored. 2 men discussing her future with the casual brutality of executives deciding which asset to liquidate. She's becoming a liability. The affairs, the politics, the questions she's asking about the contracts and the money, she knows too much. And she's unstable enough that no one would be surprised if the sentence had trailed off, but the implication was clear as shattered glass. If she had an accident, if she took too many pills, if the pressure of fame finally became too much for America's fragile sweetheart. Marilyn returned to the bed and sat down, pulling her knees to her chest like a child seeking comfort. The tape continued its patient recording, waiting for her truth. There's a file, she said quietly, hidden in the false bottom of my jewelry box. Inside are copies of contracts, memos, photographs, evidence of things I was never supposed to see. Payments made to keep certain stories buried. Agreements signed under duress. Women who disappeared from the industry after they refused to cooperate. She thought about calling someone. Her lawyer, maybe, or one of the few friends she trusted. But her phone had been acting strangely lately. Odd clicks and echoes on the line that suggested someone was listening. And besides, who could she trust? Who in Hollywood wasn't somehow connected to the same machinery that had built her up and was now preparing to tear her down? I've made mistakes, Marilyn continued, her voice steadier now, finding its rhythm. God knows I've made mistakes. I've been with married men. I've said things I shouldn't have said to people who work for newspapers. I've been late to sets and forgotten lines and broken down in tears when I should have been professional. But those aren't crimes. Those are just the human failures of someone who was never trained to be human, only trained to be perfect. A sound from outside made her freeze. A car door closing, or perhaps, or just the house settling. She waited, listening, her heart hammering against her ribs. Nothing. Just Los Angeles breathing its usual breath of tyrants and distant traffic and lives being lived beyond her walls. The truth is, I'm tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of being told who to be and how to be her. Tired of watching other women go through what I've gone through, knowing that speaking up would mean being labeled difficult or crazy or worse. She reached for one of the pill balls, not to take them, but just to hold it, feeling its weight. Her doctor had prescribed them for anxiety, for sleep, for the headaches that came from years of smiling when she wanted to scream. But lately she'd noticed the dosages changing, the pills looking slightly different, and she'd started to wonder if even her medication was being manipulated. There are things in that file that could destroy careers, that could expose the way this system really works. The abuse, the control, the systematic silencing of anyone who threatens to tell the truth. And I know that makes me dangerous. I know that's why they have started looking at me differently, talking about me differently. She thought about the meeting she'd had 2 days ago with a studio executive who'd expressed concern about her emotional state, who'd suggested with a smile that never reached his eyes that perhaps she should take some time away from the cameras. Rest. Recover. Let the professionals take care of her. It was the same language they'd used before committing Frances Farmer, before destroying Judy Garland's career, before making sure that any woman who stepped out of line served as a warning to all the others. I'm recording this because I want there to be a record, something they can't rewrite or edit or destroy. My voice, my words, my truth, preserved exactly as I speak it. Marilyn looked at the clock on her nightstand. It was past midnight now, technically August 5th. In a few hours, the sun would rise on another day of performance, another day of being Marilyn Monroe instead of Norma Jean. If she made it to morning, the thought came unbidden but not unwelcome. Not suicidal. She'd been down that road before and knew the difference, but simply aware. Aware that she'd crossed a line by collecting evidence, by planning to speak out, by becoming more trouble than she was worth. If something happens to me, she said into the recorder, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, I want people to know it wasn't because I was weak or crazy or couldn't handle fame. It was because I knew too much and refused to stay silent. She pressed stop, the click of the button final and absolute. For a moment, she sat in the silence, holding the small tape recorder in both hands like a prayer. Then she removed the tape, placed it carefully in a manila envelope, and wrote a single name on the front. Someone she trusted. Someone outside the Hollywood machine who might actually listen if the worst happened. Tomorrow she'd find a way to get it to them. Tonight she just needed to survive until morning. Outside, a car pulled up to the curb across the street. Its headlights went dark, but the engine didn't turn off. Someone was watching. Someone was always watching. Marilyn lay down on her bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. The pills were within reach if she needed them. For sleep, just for sleep, she told herself. The tape was hidden where they wouldn't think to look, and her secrets, for now, were still her own. But as exhaustion finally began to pull her under, one thought echoed through her mind with the clarity of absolute truth. They wouldn't let her keep those secrets much longer. Some moments in history echo louder than the world ever realized. If you felt that echo today, leave a 1. If you're still searching for the meaning, leave a 2. Your reflections help shape the stories we uncover next. Quest. Let's step deeper into the past. Morning came too quickly, and with it, the phone. Marilyn woke to its insistent ringing, her head heavy with a half-sleep that came from too many pills or not enough. She could never tell anymore. The clock read 7:43. Outside, Los Angeles was already bright and unforgiving, sunlight streaming through the curtains like an interrogation. She let it ring 6 times before answering. Marilyn, darling, it's Paula. Her publicist's voice was too cheerful, the kind of manufactured brightness that signaled trouble. We need to talk about yesterday's interview. Some of your comments are causing concern. Marilyn sat up slowly, her memory sorting through the fog. Yesterday, the journalist from Life magazine. She'd been tired, too honest, had let her guard slip when asked about the studio system. What did I say? She asked, though she remembered perfectly. She'd called it a machine that devoured women. She'd mentioned the files, the control, the way careers were destroyed at the first sign of independence. It doesn't matter what you said, Paula replied. And now the brightness was gone, replaced by something harder. What matters is that Mr. Davenport from the studio called me at 6 this morning. He's very worried about you, Marilyn. We all are. He thinks maybe you need some rest, real rest. There's a facility in Connecticut. Marilyn hung up. Her hands were shaking again. Worse than last night. A facility. That's what they called it when they wanted to lock you away until you forgot how to be dangerous. Until the pills and the doctors and the isolation convinced you that your truth was actually delusion. The phone rang again immediately. This time she unplugged it from the wall. She needed to move the tape. Last night's hiding place suddenly felt too obvious, too vulnerable. If they came for her, when they came for her, they'd search everything. The jewelry box would be among the first places they'd look. Marilyn showered and dressed quickly, choosing simple clothes that wouldn't attract attention, dark slacks, a plain blouse, sunglasses that covered half her face. She retrieved the tape from its hiding place and slipped it into her purse along with the envelope of documents. The file of evidence felt like it was burning through the leather, accusing her with every heartbeat. Her housekeeper, Mrs. Murray, was already in the kitchen when Marilyn came downstairs. "Good morning, Miss Monroe. You're up early." The older woman's voice was pleasant, but something in her eyes was watchful, assessing. "I have errands," Marilyn said, pouring coffee with hands that barely cooperated. "I might be gone most of the day." "Oh, should I expect you for dinner?" "I don't know yet." Mrs. Murray nodded, returning to her task of organizing the pantry, but Marilyn caught her glancing toward the phone, the one in the kitchen that was still connected, still capable of making calls, reporting calls. When had she started suspecting Mrs. Murray? Last week, when she'd noticed her housekeeper whispering into the phone and falling silent when Marilyn entered the room? Or earlier, when she'd found her personal calendar photographed and replaced slightly out of position? The paranoia felt real and unreal simultaneously, and that's what frightened her most. Not knowing if the surveillance was actual or imagined, if the danger was genuine or a symptom of the very instability they kept accusing her of. Marilyn finished her coffee and headed for the door. "Miss Monroe?" Mrs. Murray's voice stopped her at the threshold. "You seem troubled lately. If you need anything, someone to talk to, or if you'd like me to call Dr. Greenson." "I'm fine," Marilyn said, and walked out before the older woman could respond. The drive to Westwood was short, but she took a longer route, checking her rearview mirror constantly. There was a dark sedan 3 cars back that stayed with her through 2 unnecessary turns. When she pulled into a gas station, it drove past slowly, the driver's face hidden behind sunglasses and end shadow. By the time she reached the safety deposit box facility, her heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Inside, the bank was cool and quiet, populated by people conducting ordinary business with ordinary lives. Marilyn approached the desk, gave her name, a fake one she'd registered under months ago, planning ahead for a day she'd hoped would never come, and was led to the vault. The clerk left her alone with the small metal box, and Marilyn quickly transferred the tape and the most damaging documents inside. She kept a few papers in her purse, enough to prove she had evidence, not enough to lose everything if she was searched. When she emerged back into the sunlight, the dark sedan was parked across the street. She drove to a payphone 3 blocks away, parked, and dialed the number she'd written on the envelope. It rang 4 times before someone answered. Peter Lawford speaking. Marilyn closed her eyes, gathering courage. Peter was connected to the industry, to powerful people, even to networks that could either save her or destroy her, depending on which way the wind blew. But he was also someone who'd shown her kindness. And right now, kindness was a currency she desperately needed. Peter, it's Marilyn. I need your help. A pause on the other end. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something careful, almost wary. Marilyn, are you all right? I heard that there's been some concern. That's what they want you to hear. Peter, I need you to listen very carefully. If something happens to me, if I have an accident or take too many pills or end up in some facility, I need you to go to my safety deposit box. She gave him the bank name, the box number, the fake name she'd registered under. Inside is a tape, my voice, my words, evidence of things that people don't want revealed. Promise me you'll make sure it gets heard. Marilyn, you're scaring me. What kind of evidence? The kind that could change everything or get me killed. I'm not sure which. She laughed, but the sound was hollow. Maybe both. Listen to me. Peter's voice was urgent now. Come to my house. Right now. We'll figure this out together. You can't handle this alone. I'm not sure I can trust anyone, Marilyn whispered. But I'm trusting you with this. If I don't call you within 24 hours, go to that bank. Please. She hung up before he could argue. The drive home felt longer, heavier. The dark sedan was gone, but that only made her more nervous. If they weren't following her openly, what were they doing? When she pulled into her driveway, there was an unfamiliar car parked in front of her house. A man in a suit stood on her porch, briefcase in hand, waiting with the patience of someone who'd been instructed not to leave until his job was finished. Marilyn's blood ran cold. She considered backing out, driving away, disappearing into the vast anonymity of Los Angeles. But running would only confirm their narrative, that she was unstable, irrational, in need of intervention. She parked and approached slowly, her purse held tight against her side, the remaining documents inside feeling like contraband. Miss Monroe. The man smiled, but it was the smile of an undertaker. My name is Dr. Richard Morrison. I'm a colleague of Dr. Greenson's. Your friends at the studio asked me to check on you. They were very concerned about your welfare. I didn't ask for a doctor. No, but people who are truly unwell rarely do. His voice was gentle, patronizing, the tone of someone accustomed to patients who needed to be managed rather than heard. I understand you have been making some unusual claims, talking about files and evidence, expressing paranoid thoughts about being watched. He took a step closer and Marilyn saw Mrs. Murray watching from the window, her expression a mixture of concern and something else, complicity. Why don't we go inside and talk? Dr. Morrison continued. I have some medication that might help with the anxiety, and we can discuss whether a period of rest, supervised rest, might be beneficial. Marilyn's mind raced through her options. Refuse and they'd force the issue, possibly having her committed against her will. Cooperate and risk being drugged, controlled, silenced, before she could get her truth out to anyone who mattered. She thought about the tape in the safety deposit box, about Peter Lawford, who now knew where to find it, about the slim possibility that her words might survive, even if she didn't. All right, she said quietly, unlocking her front door. Let's talk. As Dr. Morrison followed her inside, Marilyn caught a glimpse of the dark sedan, parked now at the end of her street, engine running, patient as a predator waiting for wounded prey to finally stop struggling. And she understood with crystalline clarity that this was the beginning of the end. They'd come for her, and they wouldn't leave until they were certain she could never speak again. Dr. Morrison sat in her living room like he owned it. Briefcase open on the coffee table. Various pharmaceutical bottles arranged with the precision of a chess player, setting up pieces for checkmate. These will help with the sleep disturbances, he said, holding up an amber bottle. And these are for the anxiety. Dr. Greenson mentioned you have been experiencing paranoid episodes. I'm not paranoid if they're actually following me, Marilyn interrupted, still standing near the door, calculating distances, exits, possibilities. Dr. Marston's smile was indulgent, clinical. That's a common symptom, Miss Monroe. The belief that surveillance is real when it's actually a manifestation of internal distress. Tell me, have you been under unusual stress lately? Marilyn thought about the truth, about the file she compiled over 18 months, memos about contract manipulation, photographs of actresses before and after their breakdowns, financial records showing payments to doctors who certified women as mentally unfit, about the patterns she discovered of women who asked too many questions, suddenly finding themselves committed, medicated into silence, or dead from accidental overdoses. I've been under stress my entire life, she said instead. That's what being Marilyn Monroe means. Exactly. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, his voice taking on the soothing quality of someone coaxing a child away from a ledge. And after years of that pressure, it's perfectly natural for the mind to begin creating narratives to explain the pain. Conspiracy theories, persecution fantasies. These are defense mechanisms. But they're not reality, Miss Monroe. Reality is that you're exhausted and you need help. Through the window, Marilyn could see Mrs. Murray in the garden, pruning roses with unusual focus, her back deliberately turned to the house, giving them privacy, or giving Dr. Morrison time to do what he'd been sent to do. What exactly did the studio tell you, Marilyn asked? That you've been making accusations, claiming to have evidence of wrongdoing, talking about tapes and files. Dr. Morrison's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes had gone sharp, calculating. They're worried you might do something to hurt yourself, or worse, hurt your own career by making public claims you can't substantiate. And if I can substantiate them, the air in the room shifted. Dr. Morrison's smile faded just slightly, and in that fraction of a second, Marilyn saw the truth beneath the professional concern. He knew. About the files, the evidence, the reality of what she'd discovered. He knew because he was part of it. One of the doctors who'd signed commitment papers, who'd prescribed the pills that kept difficult women compliant, who'd helped the industry bury its problems 6 feet deep, or in institutions that might as well be the same thing. Miss Monroe, he said carefully, making unfounded accusations against powerful people is a serious matter. It suggests a break with reality that requires immediate intervention. So I'm crazy if I have proof. You're unwell if you believe having materials constitutes proof of anything except your own declining mental state. He stood, moving toward her with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Now I'm going to give you something to help you rest, a mild sedative. Then we're going to call a facility I'm affiliated with. Very comfortable, very discreet, where you can recover in peace. Marilyn's hand tightened on her purse. Inside were the remaining documents, the evidence she hadn't transferred to the safety deposit box. If he searched her, found them, it would all be over. I need to use the bathroom first, she said. Dr. Morrison hesitated, clearly calculating whether to allow her even that small privacy. Finally, he nodded. Of course. I'll wait here. Marilyn walked calmly to the bathroom, closed the door, and locked it. Her reflection stared back from the mirror, pale, frightened, but still defiant. She had minutes, maybe seconds, before he became suspicious. She opened her purse and pulled out the remaining documents, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped them. The bathroom window was small, but not impossible. It opened onto the side yard away from where Mrs. Murray was working. Through the door, she could hear Dr. Morrison's voice, muffled but clear. He was on the phone. Yes, she's becoming agitated. No, I don't think she'll cooperate voluntarily. Have the ambulance ready? We may need to classify this as a psychiatric emergency. Marilyn's decision crystallized in that moment. She couldn't escape through the window. They'd catch her before she made it to her car. She couldn't flush the documents. They'd search the plumbing. And she couldn't let them take her to a facility where she'd disappear into a fog of medication and locked doors. She had one option left: create enough noise that anyone, would have to pay attention. Marilyn opened the medicine cabinet and deliberately swept everything into the tile floor. The crash was spectacular. Bottles shattering, pills scattering, the sound of chaos that couldn't be ignored. Dr. Morrison was at the door instantly. "Miss Monroe, open this door." Instead, she unlocked it and threw it open, confronting him with the full force of her fury. "You want to drug me? Lock me away? Make me another cautionary tale about women who couldn't handle fame?" "Miss Monroe, please calm down." "I'm calm." Her voice rose, pitched to carry beyond these walls, to reach the neighbors, the street, anyone who might hear. "I'm calm enough to know exactly what you are. You're not a doctor helping patients. You're a tool the studio uses to silence women who know too much." She pushed past him into the living room, and Dr. Morrison grabbed her arm. "Miss Monroe, you're having a psychotic episode. I'm having a moment of clarity." She wrenched free and grabbed the phone, dialing the operator with fingers that barely cooperated. "Yes, I need the police. This is Marilyn Monroe at 10305 Fifth Helena Drive. There's a man in my house trying to forcibly medicate me." Dr. Morrison yanked the phone from her hand, the cord ripping from the wall. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be." "Good," Marilyn said, backing toward the door. "I want it to be hard. I want witnesses. I want questions. I want—" The front door opened, and two men in white uniforms entered, carrying a stretcher and restraints. Not an ambulance crew responding to an emergency. They had been waiting outside, ready for the moment Dr. Morrison gave the signal. Marilyn ran. She made it 3 steps before they caught her, their hands professional and impersonal, controlling her body with the efficiency of people who did this often. One of them pulled out a syringe while the other held her arms. "No!" Marilyn screamed, fighting with everything she had. But they were stronger, trained, prepared. "Please, someone help me. They're going to." The needle bit into her arm, and immediately the world began to soften at the edges. "There we go." Dr. Morrison's voice came from somewhere far away. "Just relax, Miss Monroe. Everything will be better soon." But as the drug pulled her under, as her muscles went slack and her vision blurred, Marilyn felt a strange sense of victory, because she had been loud, because neighbors had probably heard, because she'd made it messy and public and impossible to sweep away quietly, and because somewhere in a bank vault in Westwood, her voice waited on a tape recorder, preserved and protected, ready to tell the truth even if she couldn't. Her last conscious thought was of Peter Lawford. She hadn't called within 24 hours. She'd barely made it 12. She hoped he would remember. She hoped he would go to the bank. She hoped her words would survive, even if she didn't. The darkness took her like a tide, and Marilyn Monroe disappeared into the pharmaceutical fog they'd prepared for her. Her voice silenced, her truth trapped in a metal box that suddenly felt very far away. But in the pocket of her purse, which they'd taken from her limp fingers, the documents remained. Evidence they hadn't yet found. Proof that was still waiting to be discovered. If anyone cared enough to look. Consciousness returned in fragments. White ceiling tiles. The smell of antiseptic. Voices speaking about her as if she wasn't there, or as if she was an object incapable of understanding human speech. Marilyn tried to move and discovered her wrists were restrained. Soft fabric cuffs that felt gentle, but held absolutely. "She's waking up." A nurse's voice, clinical and distant. "Should I increase the dosage?" No, a different voice, male, familiar. "I need her coherent enough to sign." Marilyn forced her eyes to focus. The room was small, windowless, the kind of place designed to be both clinic and cell. And sitting in a chair beside her bed, looking at her with a mixture of pity and impatience, was Victor Davenport, the studio executive who'd been managing her career for the past 4 years. "Hello, Marilyn." He smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd already won. I'm sorry it came to this. We really did try to help you the easy way. She tried to speak, but her mouth felt stuffed with cotton, her tongue thick and uncooperative. The sedatives were still working, keeping her thoughts slow and her body unresponsive. Victor leaned forward, placing a clipboard on her lap. Through the bish, Marilyn could see it was a legal document, dense with text, signature lines waiting at the bottom. This is a voluntary commitment form, he explained, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone speaking to a child. It states that you've recognized your need for psychiatric treatment and are checking yourself into this facility willingly. It also includes a statement that your recent claims about studio wrongdoing were products of your mental illness. Paranoid delusions brought on by stress and substance abuse. Marilyn's vision began to clear, and with it came rage. Pure, crystalline rage that burned through the pharmaceutical fog like fire through cobwebs. Also, while Victor continued, pulling another document, this is a revised contract, much more generous than the one you refused 6 months ago. Better terms, more money. All you have to do is sign both papers, and this unpleasantness can be over. You'll get treatment, recover your reputation, and return to making the films your audience loves. He held out a pen, and Marilyn saw the trap perfectly. Sign, and she admitted to being crazy, discredited her own evidence before it could ever be heard. Refuse, and they'd keep her here indefinitely, a cautionary tale about what happened to difficult women who thought they could fight the system. No, she whispered, the words scraping out of her throat like broken glass. Victor's smile faded. Marilyn, be reasonable. You have no choices left. Your evidence, if it even exists, will be dismissed as the fabrications of a mentally ill woman. The tape you mentioned to Peter Lawford, he watched her face, saw the shock register. Yes, we know about that. Peter called the studio, worried about you. Very responsible of him. We've already sent people to every bank in Westwood. Marilyn's heart cracked. Peter had betrayed her. Or maybe he genuinely thought he was helping, thought the studio would take care of her. It didn't matter which. The result was the same. You can't find it, she said, finding strength in that truth. You don't know which bank, which name I used. You don't know anything. We will, and when we do, we'll destroy it. Just like we're going to destroy every copy of your so-called evidence. Victor stood, straightening his suit jacket. This is your last chance, Marilyn. Sign the papers, accept the treatment, keep your career, or refuse, and spend the rest of your life in facilities like this, medicated into silence, watching your legacy turn into a tragic story about a beautiful woman who couldn't handle fame. He set the pen on the clipboard and walked to the door. I'll give you an hour to think about it. The nurse will keep you comfortable. The door closed with a soft click, and Marilyn was alone. She stared at the ceiling and felt tears track down her temples into her hair. This was how it ended then, not with a dramatic escape or a heroic revelation, but with a slow chemical erasure, her truth buried beneath medication and forced compliance. Unless, the thought was small, fragile, but it grew as she turned it over in her mind. They hadn't found the tape yet, which meant it was still out there, still waiting, and they'd made one critical mistake. They'd told her they knew about it, which meant someone had actually listened to her. Someone knew the tape existed, and even if they destroyed it, even if they found every scrap of evidence she'd collected, the knowledge that she'd tried to speak out would remain. That was something, not much, but something. The door opened again, and Marilyn expected to see Victor returning with the threats or promises. Instead, it was a woman she didn't recognize, middle-aged, dressed in a nurse's uniform, but with eyes that held intelligence rather than clinical detachment. Miss Monroe, the woman said quietly, checking the hallway before closing the door. My name is Helen Pierce. I've worked at facilities like this for 20 years. And I've seen what they do to women like you, women who know too much, who speak too loud, who refuse to disappear quietly. She moved to Marilyn's bedside and began checking the restraints, not tightening them, but loosening them just slightly. "Why are you telling me this?" Marilyn whispered. Helen met her eyes. "Because 15 years ago, I was a young actress. Not famous like you, but working, hopeful. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see, an executive forcing himself on a girl barely 18, other executives watching and laughing. I reported it, thought I was doing the right thing." Her expression was haunted. "3 days later, I had a nervous breakdown. Spent 6 months in a facility very much like this one. By the time I got out, my career was over. Nobody would hire me. The only work I could find was as a nurse in the places that had destroyed me." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small key. "Your purse is in the intake office. Third drawer down, locked. Inside are some documents. I saw them when they processed you. I don't know what's in them, but Victor Davenport spent 20 minutes on the phone making sure they were secured. That tells me they're important." "Why are you helping me, Ty?" Marilyn asked, her voice breaking. "Because I couldn't help myself. Because for 15 years, I've watched them do this to other women, and I've done nothing. Told myself I was just following orders, just trying to survive." Helen pressed the key into Marilyn's palm. "The shift changes at midnight. The night nurse drinks. By 12:30, that she'll be passed out in the break room. The side door leads to the parking lot. From there, you're on your own. They'll know you helped me." "Yes." Helen's smile was sad but certain. "But I'm tired of being complicit. I'm tired of surviving by helping them destroy people. So tonight I'm choosing truth over safety, just like you did." She moved to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. "The tape you mentioned, whatever's on it, make sure people hear it. Make sure women like me, like you, like all the others they've silenced, make sure we're not forgotten." Then she was gone, and Marilyn was alone with a key and a choice. She could stay, sign the papers, accept the medication and the revised narrative and the return to being Marilyn Monroe, beloved and controlled and safe. Or she could run, knowing they'd chase her, knowing she might not make it, knowing that even if she succeeded in retrieving the tape, it might not be enough to change anything. Marilyn looked at the clipboard with its waiting signature lines, at the contract that would give her back her career at the cost of her truth, at the pharmaceutical bottles lined up on the counter, ready to keep her compliant and quiet, and disappeared. She thought about all the other women, the ones who'd come before her and been destroyed, the ones who would come after and face the same choice, cooperate or be erased. She thought about Norma Jean Mortensen, the girl she'd been before they had built Marilyn Monroe on top of her like a beautiful gravestone, and she made her choice. At 12:37 a.m., a figure in a patient's gown slipped through the side door of the facility, barefoot and trembling, clutching a purse full of evidence and a determination that felt like fire in her chest. Behind her, alarms would eventually sound. Victor Davenport would rage. They would search and hunt and try to reclaim their property before it could escape completely. But Marilyn Monroe was already gone, disappearing into the August darkness, racing toward a bank vault where her voice waited to be heard. And for the first time in years, she was running towards something instead of away. Marilyn reached the bank just as dawn was breaking over Los Angeles, the city waking slowly to a day that didn't yet know what she'd done. She'd stolen clothes from a laundromat, jeans and a t-shirt left in a dryer, a baseball cap someone had forgotten on a bench. Her feet were blistered and bleeding from running barefoot on pavement for 3 miles before she'd found shoes in a charity donation box. She looked nothing like Marilyn Monroe, and that was her only advantage. The bank wouldn't open for another 3 hours. Marilyn sat in a coffee shop across the street, nursing a cup she'd paid for with quarters scrounged from her purse, watching the entrance like a soldier watching enemy territory. They would come. She knew they would come. The only question was whether she could reach the tape before they reached her. At 9 a.m. exactly, she crossed the street. The same clerk from before looked at her with confusion. This disheveled woman bore little resemblance to the polished actress who'd visited days ago. But Marilyn gave the name, showed her identification, and the protocols were followed. Within minutes, she was alone in the small room with the safety deposit box. Inside was the tape, her voice, her truth. She held it against her chest and allowed herself 10 seconds of relief before reality crashed back. Having the tape wasn't enough. She needed to get it to someone who would actually use it, who wouldn't be pressured or threatened into burying it. Peter Lawford was out, betrayed or coerced, it didn't matter. The journalists she knew all had studio connections. The lawyers all had conflicts of interest. Then she remembered Margaret Hayes, the actress who'd called during her lawsuit research months ago, offering support. Margaret had nothing left to lose. The industry had already taken everything from her, which meant she might be the only person desperate enough or brave enough to help. Marilyn found a payphone outside the bank and dialed the number from memory. Hello? Margaret's voice was cautious, like someone who'd learned not to expect good news. Margaret, this is Marilyn Monroe. We spoke months ago about testimony that I know who you are. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. My God, Marilyn, where are you? It's all over the news. They're saying you escaped from a psychiatric facility, that you're having a complete breakdown, that you're dangerous to yourself and others. Marilyn closed her eyes. Of course they were. Within hours, they'd transformed her escape from imprisonment into proof of her instability. I have a tape, Marilyn said. My voice, documenting everything, the surveillance, the control, the systematic silencing of women who threaten the system. I need someone to get it to the press. Real press, not the gossip columns they control. Marilyn, I know what I'm asking. I know they'll come after you too. But Margaret, if we don't do this, nothing changes. We just become two more cautionary tales about women who couldn't handle the pressure. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, where are you? Marilyn gave her the address of a park in Santa Monica, public enough to be safe, open enough to see threats coming. I'll be there in 40 minutes, Margaret said. But Marilyn, they're going to destroy you for this. Even if the tape gets out, even if people believe it, the industry will make sure you never work again. They'll paint you as bitter, vengeful, mentally ill. Everything you've built was built on quicksand anyway, Marilyn finished. At least this way, something real might survive the collapse. The park was nearly empty when Marilyn arrived, early enough that the mothers with children hadn't appeared, late enough that the night people had gone home. She sat on a bench facing the ocean, the tape recorder hidden in her purse, and watched the waves roll in with their eternal indifference. Margaret arrived exactly on time, looking older than Marilyn remembered, worn down by years of fighting battles she couldn't win. She sat beside Marilyn without speaking at first, both of them staring at the water. I brought someone, Margaret finally said. Okay, a journalist. She works for an independent paper, no studio connections. She's in the car waiting. If you give her the tape now, I can make sure it gets published, even if she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to, even if they silence you permanently. Marilyn pulled out the tape recorder and held it in her lap. Such a small object to contain so much truth. Such a fragile thing to base hope on. Before I give the tour, I need you to understand something, Marilyn said quietly. This won't change everything overnight. The studios are too powerful, too entrenched. They'll fight back, discredit the tape, destroy anyone associated with it. This isn't a victory, it's just a record. Proof that we existed, that we tried, that we refused to disappear silently. Margaret reached over and covered Marilyn's hand with her own. That's all we can ever do. Bear witness, tell the truth, and hope that someday someone will listen. The journalist, a woman in her 30s named Catherine Chen, with sharp eyes and a notebook that looked well used, listened to the tape in Margaret's car while Marilyn and Margaret waited outside. 47 minutes of Marilyn's voice, speaking truths that had been buried for decades. When Catherine emerged, her expression was grim. This is going to cause an earthquake. The studios will deny everything, attack your credibility, possibly sue for defamation. Are you prepared for that? I've been prepared since the moment I pressed record, Marilyn said. Catherine nodded. Then I'll run it. Tomorrow's edition. Front page. As she drove away with the tape, Marilyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not relief exactly, but release. The truth was no longer just hers to carry. It had been shared, distributed, given to the world to do with what it would. What will you do now? Margaret asked. Marilyn looked out at the ocean, at Los Angeles, spreading behind her like a beautiful lie. I don't know. Disappear, maybe. They'll be looking for me. They'll want to silence me before the article comes out, discredit me, prove I'm as unstable as they've been claiming. You could come stay with me. I have a small place in San Francisco, far enough from Hollywood that... No, Marilyn stood, and despite her exhaustion, despite the terror and uncertainty, she felt strangely calm. I need to face this alone. Whatever happens next, whether they find me, whether anyone believes the tape, whether any of this matters, I need to face it as myself, not as someone's project, not as someone's cause, just as Norma Jean speaking her truth and accepting the consequences. Margaret stood too and impulsively pulled Marilyn into an embrace. You're braver than you know. No, Marilyn whispered against her shoulder. I'm just tired of being afraid. They parted on the beach, two women who'd been chewed up by the same machine, connected now by the thin thread of shared resistance. Marilyn walked along the shoreline as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning fog. Behind her, Los Angeles hummed with its daily business. Studios making movies, executives making decisions, young actresses signing contracts that would shape their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Somewhere in that city, Victor Davenport was probably coordinating her recapture. But Doug Morrison was filing reports about her dangerous mental state. Mrs. Murray was being interviewed about warning signs she'd noticed. The machinery of her destruction was in full motion. But tomorrow, when Catherine Chen's article ran, when Marilyn's voice on that tape reached people who'd never heard an actress speak so honestly about the system that owned them, tomorrow, something might shift. Not everything, maybe not even much, but something. And that small possibility, that fragile hope, felt like enough to keep walking, even if she was walking toward an ending she couldn't control, even if the price of speaking truth was everything she had left to lose. The article ran on August 7th, 1962. Marilyn never saw it in print. By the time Catherine Chen's story hit the newsstands, Hollywood's hidden machine, actress exposes systematic control of women in film industry. Marilyn was already guessing. Not dead, not committed, just gone. She'd taken a bus to San Francisco, then another to Portland, and finally settled in a small coastal town in Oregon where nobody looked twice at a woman with brown hair and tired eyes who rented a room above a bookstore and worked mornings at a diner. She read about the aftermath in newspapers that arrived 3 days late. The studios had responded exactly as predicted, with fury and denial. They called the tape a fabrication, doctored by a mentally unstable woman seeking revenge for her own professional failures. They produced psychiatrists who testified to her paranoid delusions. They leaked stories about her drug use, her affairs, her erratic behavior on set. But something unexpected happened too. Other women started talking. Actresses whose careers had been destroyed, who'd been labeled difficult or crazy or washed up. They came forward with their own stories. The pattern became too obvious to ignore. The file Marilyn had compiled found its way to a congressional committee investigating labor practices in Hollywood. Her reporters who'd been afraid to challenge the studios found courage in numbers. It wasn't a revolution. The studio system didn't collapse overnight, but cracks appeared in the foundation, and through those cracks, truth began to seep. 3 months after the article ran, Marilyn received a letter. No return address, just a postmark from Los Angeles. Inside was a newspaper clipping, a small article buried on page 7 about new guidelines being drafted for actress contracts. protections against coerced medical treatment, limits on surveillance, the right to refuse projects without penalty. And beneath the clipping, 3 words in handwriting she recognized as Margaret Hayes's, "You did this." Marilyn kept the clipping in the drawer beside her bed, next to the other pieces of her old life she'd carried into this new one. A photograph of herself at 19, before Monroe existed, the fake identification she'd used at the bank, a pressed flower from the garden of her Brentwood house, the last thing she'd taken before walking away forever. She didn't miss being famous. That surprised her more than anything. How little she missed the cameras, the attention, the constant performance of being someone the world wanted her to be. What she missed was simpler, the craft of acting itself, the feeling of stepping into another person's life, speaking words that mattered, creating something beautiful even if it was temporary. An evening in late November, she walked into the small community theater in town. They were holding auditions for a production of The Glass Menagerie. The director, a retired teacher named Frank who ran the theater out of passion rather than profit, looked up from his script as she approached. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to audition," Marilyn said, "for Laura." He handed her sides, and she read without artifice, without the breathy voice or calculated gestures that had been Marilyn Monroe's signature. She just spoke the words honestly, let them breathe, found the truth in them. When she finished, Frank was quiet for a long moment. "What's your name?" he asked. Marilyn hesitated, then, Norma Jean Edwards." "Well, Norma, the role is yours if you want it. We can't pay much. Actually, we can't pay anything. But we put on a good show." "That's all I need," she said, and meant it. The production ran for 3 weekends in January. Maybe 200 people total saw it. Locals who came to support the community theater, who had no idea that Laura Wingfield was being played by someone who'd once been the most photographed woman in America. On closing night, an elderly woman approached Norma for the show. "That was beautiful," she said. "I've never seen Laura played with such honesty, such pain. It felt real." "Thank you," Norma replied and felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the strange, unexpected joy of being seen for her work rather than her image. That night, walking home along the beach with the sound of waves keeping her company, Norma thought about the cost of her choice. She'd given up fame, fortune, the career she'd built over 15 years. She'd sacrificed her name, her identity, her place in the world. But she'd gained something she couldn't have articulated when she was still Marilyn Monroe, still trapped in that golden cage. She'd gained herself back. 2 years later, Norma received another letter. This one was from Catherine Chen, the journalist who'd published her story. "Dear Norma, I hope this letter finds you well, wherever you are. I wanted you to know that the congressional hearings concluded last month. New labor protections were enacted for performers. Not everything we hoped for, but more than we had. Studio contracts can no longer include clauses allowing forced psychiatric commitment. Actresses have the right to third-party contract review. It's not perfect, but it's progress. More importantly, 3 women contacted me last week. Young actresses just starting their careers. They said they had read your tape transcripts and decided not to sign contracts they weren't comfortable with. One of them is producing her own film now, maintaining creative control. She wanted me to thank you. Your voice changed things, Norma. Not everything, but enough. Enough that the next generation has choices you never had. Enough that speaking truth became a little less dangerous and a little more possible. I don't know if you will ever want to come back to Los Angeles, or if you've built a life wherever you are that feels more true than anything you had here. But I wanted you to know you mattered. Not Marilyn Monroe, the icon, but you, Norma Jean, speaking truth, even when it cost you everything. With gratitude and respect, Catherine Apa. Norma read the letter 3 times, then walked to the beach and stood where the water met the sand, watching the sunset over the Pacific. She thought about the girl she'd been, desperate to be seen, to matter, to be loved by a world that only loved the version of her it had created. She thought about Marilyn Monroe, that beautiful construction, that gilded prison she had lived in for so long. And she thought about who she'd become in the silence of obscurity, a woman who acted in community theater, who served coffee to fishermen and tourists, who was known simply as Norma, the quiet woman in the apartment above the bookstore. Fame had promised her everything and given her nothing that mattered. Anonymity had promised nothing and given her the one thing she'd spent her whole life searching for, the freedom to be real. She would never know if the cost had been worth it. Some nights she still woke from dreams of cameras and crowds, still felt the phantom weight of being Marilyn Monroe. Monroe. Still wondered if she'd made the right choice or just the only choice she could live with. But on this evening, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Norma felt something close to peace. Because somewhere in Los Angeles, young women were reading her words and making different choices. Somewhere in America, the machinery that had tried to own her was forced to change, even if only slightly. Somewhere in the quiet corners of history, her truth had survived. Not the legend, not the icon, not the manufactured myth of Marilyn Monroe, but the real voice of a real woman who'd refused to disappear silently. And that finally was enough. Years later, long after Norma Jean had lived a full life in that coastal town, teaching acting to young people, performing in small productions, growing old with a dignity the world had never permitted Marilyn Monroe, someone would find the original tape in an archive. They would listen to that voice, preserved and honest, speaking truths that still resonated decades later, and they would understand what she'd known all along, that fame may shape the world's memory of a person, but only truth shapes their soul. That the price of being real is everything the world tells you matters, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is choosing to be forgotten on your own terms rather than remembered on someone else's. Norma Jean Mortensen had been erased to create Marilyn Monroe, but in the end, she'd erased Marilyn Monroe to reclaim herself. And in that reclamation, she'd given every woman who came after her a map back to their own truth. That was her untold legacy. Not the films or the photographs or the icon, but the courage to speak, even knowing the cost. The courage to choose truth over legend. The courage to survive by becoming real. Some stories never truly end. They simply fade into the quiet corners of memory. If today's journey awakens something in you, share your thoughts below. And remember, every untold story deserves someone willing to listen. If you carried a truth too heavy for fame, would you hide it or reveal it? If this story moved you, please subscribe to Marilyn Monroe, The Untold Legacy, so that more forgotten voices from Hollywood's past can be heard again.